Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues and listeners, good morning. Here we are again. We've got another session, another podcast and another great guest. So today I've got Shawn Richards, who's the CEO of Aviation. Shawn, welcome, sir. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me on.
And I've got to say straight off the bat, Shawn, you make me feel really, really down dressed there. You look so professional and a great background. So well done, sir.
Well, thank you very much, but you don't look so bad yourself.
Ah, God bless you. Eh? Right, we're off to a great start. So now, something that I really liked when I just looking through some of the materials on your organization, technology solutions. Okay, the word solutions, the words, I think it just resonates, especially at this moment in time when there's so many things that need to be done, addressed, etc. So can you just give us a little bit of background as to what Aviation has been doing since 2011 and what are your focus points at this moment in time?
Okay, so our company produces, as you've just touched on, solutions for airports, airlines, and a type of company called ground handlers. They are people who prepare the planes between their arrival and departing again. So it's really the full spectrum of people involved in turning a plane and getting it ready to go. So what we do is we focus on a number of different types of platforms on which we can deploy cloud solutions. So we deploy on traditional desktops, desktop PCs, smart devices such as tablets and mobile phones. I think we were pretty much one of the first to bring the full departure control suite onto mobile devices. So we remain very passionate about that. And self-service devices. So we touched on that a few years ago, but we've come roaring back with, I think, some very good solutions that incorporate biometrics and really try to commoditize the technology and make it more accessible for many countries that are not able to look at it because of the price point. So we've been pretty busy.
Okay, very good. Now, again, like while we're on the train of positivity, the thing there you said, helping airlines and airports streamline their operations and reduce costs. Now, that is so important at this moment in time. And you also coined a phrase which lots of people are using. So they've stopped using the new normal because I think people are fed up with it because they're beginning to forget what normal was. And you mentioned about build back better. Now, that's a term that we've been using quite a bit, and also in other parts of consultancy. And I've also now added bring back better and bounce back better. Okay, so especially now for the travel industry and aviation, there's going to be a huge bounce back. As soon as people can decide whether or not they're going to control this battle against the virus rather than try and eradicate it and live with it, there's going to be a huge bounce back. And then also there's the option for companies to either decide to build back, which would indicate that there was a total collapse or there was a total demolition of what happened before, or bring back in a much more effective way. So this crisis, I think now, not only has it put more of an emphasis on sustainability, but it's now given people the option to really get rid of their legacies of waste and administrative bureaucracy and everything. So with biometrics, digitization, with having things like you said at people's fingertips and something that's not alien with them now. I mean, this is a great opportunity for your organization, huh?
Yeah, it's actually a great opportunity for the industry as a whole. Now, aviation has suffered very badly, as have many other verticals. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has done, I mean, while we've focused on the tragedy and the effect on people's health, actually, when you look at industry, commerce, pretty much every business that trades, it's hard to think of a single one that's not touched in some way and needs to look again at how it works. So as much as there is disruption and a lot of negative things that have happened, I think it's also a point for reflection because many industries are at a place where there was a kind of unsustainable upward growth pattern, but alongside that growth came a lot of waste, as you touched on. So of course, when you're making a lot of money and you're wasting a bit around the side, who cares about that? But when you're not making as much, all of a sudden that huge amount of waste, that 10, 15, 20, 30% of waste, all of a sudden you need to look back at it and think, does it really have to be that way? Now in aviation, there are a lot of costs around messaging, common use, a very tight coupling to desktop PC processing and the space that comes along with that. Because if you need a desktop PC, you need a desktop.
Yep.
And if you need a desktop, you need a desk. And the space that that uses in an airport all drives, at least in the check-in area, the big footprint, the energy usage, etc., that happens when it comes to processing people. So you have lots of opportunities to look at how people are handled. Biometrics can certainly help. The touchless journey, while it looks good, the convenience it brings to passengers is absolutely fantastic. And there is a massive time saving that could be made by passengers that are using it. Yep. But that time saving also translates through to time savings for airlines. And for airports, it means that the transaction rate, if it's lower, you can handle more people within less space. So you can either use that to process more people within the same space, or you can use it to free up space because people aren't dwelling as long as they usually do. So there are lots of savings to be made with processing people, but also processing baggage. Yeah. So a lot of the processes that happen in the check-in area and even pre-check-in have to do with handling baggage. So airlines have online check-in that makes the process quite convenient, but then you have to wrestle your bags. So there's things like remote baggage. We do really a lot of that with one of our customers, Jet2. Yeah. So you're able to check in baggage before it gets to the airport, and then you don't have to deal with it. So just things like that, and moving processes outside the airport and making the process inside the airport more seamless. And if you start bringing biometrics into that, where people are using your face or your eyes, so iris recognition and so on, the journey through the airport can be less abrasive, giving people more time to spend in duty free and in the lounge and stuff like that. So I think if you start looking at the positives and then start bringing in some of the health aspects that we're going to touch on later and bring that into the process, instead of wrestling with, COVID certificates and, vaccination proofs and all this kind of stuff that we're all going to have to get used to, we can start looking at how some of this technology that might have been viewed as maybe a little bit of a luxury can become a staple, and we can build our processes around those next generation technologies, which are now today's technologies, and start leaving some of the more wasteful ways of processing in the past where they kind of belong.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's a little bit of good timing that they've just landed on Mars and they've got their first pictures back. I remember people saying, yeah, one day they'll decide to land on Mars. When they do that, something else will happen, and it's now current, and I think also this last year has pushed digitization and the various global population into realizing that things can be done better instead of just putting that barrier up in front of them. And I remember a story, they're just talking about the anniversary of decimalization as well. And I remember a story that came out, and I was working on a market stall at the time. And the story was about this old lady was being interviewed, and they said to her, you do realize that things are changing? And she said, yes, of course, you can't beat change. And then they said, but it's now going to be, you're not going to be able to buy a pound of kilos anymore, because it's a pound of potatoes anymore, because it's changing to kilos. And she said, okay. She said, I've got no problem. She said, I'll buy a pound of kilos. And she was more ready to have the actual product change than the way she was able to count and the way and that sort of barrier, I think this last year now has sped everybody up, with e-commerce, with wanting to do things quickly, more focus on self-sanitization and self-security. All those things are so important that I think people are a lot more in favor of doing things now that make sense.
Yeah, I think people are always in favor of doing things that save them time, save them money, things are easier to do. But a lot of times, some of this more innovative technologies and some of these more innovative processes can actually add something on there because it's a little bit gimmicky.
Yes.
I think what needs to happen is people need to re-engineer around those processes, and everybody needs to buy into it. So if something is more seamless, that doesn't mean it's less secure. It doesn't mean that you're not getting the information you want as an organization, as a government back into your system. It just means that it's different. Now, for change, especially huge change to occur, you usually need a spur. And that spur is the kind of crisis we're going through now. So even though it is a tragedy, especially the loss of life and the long illnesses that people are suffering and things like that, I think from a business point of view, it is that inflection point where they have got to look at pretty much everything they do, the reason why they're making people queue. If you're going to see a piece of paper and stamp it or something like that, you got to ask yourself, well, why is this being done? Okay, it might have been done for 20, 30, 40 years, but we're in a different time now. We have different challenges.
Yeah.
And as you were saying about going to Mars, I'm a little bit of an optimist in the way I think there's nothing that humanity can't achieve if it puts its mind to it. The problem is the hardest challenge we have is actually working together as humanity to solve these problems. And once we work together, then everything else kind of falls into place. So I think technical challenges, issues such as, adjusting the way things work in order to kind of not coexist with COVID, but make it less of a disruptive force over time, because it's going to be here for a while. The vaccines are going to take some time to roll out. Their projections, rolling that back to like 2 years, it may take to have deployment, especially through developing countries. So we're going to be here for a while with this, while certain countries may be vaccinated up to a level that allows herd immunity to work. There are going to be other communities that can't do that. And then those people will be traveling. So we're going to start getting used to red lists and mandatory quarantines and changing borders, opening, closing, while the industry tries to recover. So it's not going to be a smooth, immediate bounce. It will be a normalization, a gradual normalization, and an increase in processing. But we have to be able to adjust to the bumps along the way. And I'm pretty sure we will. Technology like what we bring along helps do that. But I think everybody has to play their part, because a lot of the things we can do to recover from the virus don't actually have to do with technology. It's the hand washing and that kind of stuff that seems almost boring now, but it's actually quite important, because the virus needs certain basic things to be true in order for it to be transmissible. So once we play our part, and in the things that we are able to control through technology, like processing people faster so you don't have such long queues, and it makes social distancing possible to enforce. If you have a massive crowd filling up a room, how are you going to social distance in that? So, everybody has their part to play, and we've just got to get on with it, really.
Yeah, no, I agree. And something you touched on there about, queue management and people management. If they don't understand why, you tend to get people who will always be complaining or struggling with something. And when you look, and we'll just take Gatwick not because I'm picking on Gatwick or anything, but Gatwick had so many options for people to go on holidays, and it was always associated with, so you go there, and then some of the carriers, they had, self baggage check, but you'd still see these huge queues. And the disgruntlement and the moaning that was in the queues would drive you crazy. And then there's a few staff trying to deal with it, and people, not keying in the right issues, the bag getting squashed in the side and being held up. So they were seeing it as being ineffective. And you'd hear people saying they're only doing it to cut jobs. They're only doing it to save money. I believe anywhere now where there's potential queues or potential processing of people, the way we deliver PR and information and communication to make things more clear, I think there's a bigger acceptance level now, and we should be optimizing that a lot more. Okay, so airports are renowned for everybody swamping the poor agent gate at the gate when something's delayed, or they say, well, nobody's told me and there hasn't been an announcement for 15 minutes. And you see somebody saying, when are we going to take off? And they look at their watch as if the watch is going to tell them when they're going to take off. And that frustration and that madness, you know, technology has got a part to play there where it can automatically give people updates. And if as a human being, you say, you know, this is the case now, and in 15 minutes, we're going to give you an update. Everybody's looking at their watches for that 15-minute deadline. As soon as it goes over 15 minutes, they're mad. But if somebody tells them something 13 and a half minutes and it's still not good news, they'll accept it. And I think this dramatic change now is such a wonderful opportunity to do things better. And what you're talking about is, you know, having access with mobiles, Androids, then being able to do self-service. Why would somebody not want to print off their own labels? And people are already now buying these little devices to check the weight of their bags because they don't want to be screwed when they're a kilo over or whatever. So if they can do that, if they can print it, they can weigh it, and they know that they're going to go through what they consider to be a fast track exercise, they're going to see it as less contamination potential or less mixing and going through quicker. So I see all that with the self-service and moving people from back office to front office to help and facilitate. So that's brilliant. Now, when they still have to do that automatic check-in or process, they're not now dealing with somebody in front of them who's checking the certificates or the paperwork. Okay. Now, for years, and I've worked in places all over the world where there's been groups of passengers being sent back to countries not allowed. You know, you've got the incorrect visa, all these things, and the fines. So that's another motivation to have that done. But also now something that people are facing is people are talking about having these vaccination certificates and paper. As soon as you have paperwork, you've got a bigger opportunity for fraud. So those delays that people seen on the news with people going through, I mean, that's a huge responsibility on individuals who haven't had a great deal of training or familiarization with those documents. And it's such a time-consuming exercise. With your technology, are you able to come up with a solution for how that can be best managed? Or do you think it's going to go to a digitized passport, you know, where the data is kept centrally and it's just scanned, cleared, and there's a link to biometrics perhaps? How are you seeing that sort of space age control coming into everyday life?
It's actually a mix of all of what you've said. We're a big believer in digitized passports. We think they will have an increasing role to play in the departure process. So right now you just grab your physical passport, your boarding pass, and you're off to the airport. Well, already now you have to start making sure your COVID test certificate is there, otherwise you're going to have a problem. So as you said, there is an issue of fraud. Digital passports help remove that. So we work with a partner called Tento Health, and we bundle their solution within ours. And we're also able to work with any QR code provider, because part of the solution here is, again, not getting into the Sony Betamax kind of argument. It's actually working with everyone's technical solution, because it takes so little effort to cross-operate that it's not worth that kind of fight. It's not about grabbing ground and market share and all of that. It's about mobilizing people a bit better. And then apart from that, we've built a process for our product called Health APIS, which we can describe in a little more detail, is based actually on paper. So working with a paper-based process, we're starting from a starting point where it's 100% paper. There are a few countries that have rolled out digital QR code initiatives already. But I think if you take the average airport and you ask, well, how are you proving your COVID status? It's starting with paper. Yeah. So if we start with a solution that depends on 100% of people having QR codes, we're kind of ignoring the transition period. And what we've decided to do is deal with that transition straight away by starting with paper, which covers 100%. And as people start using digital passports, which removes the fraud, which makes things easier. It makes it easier to track a history of your test results and so on, and not necessarily track you as a person, because a lot of these initiatives have the ability to contain the data within the wallet itself. So the centralization of information is not uniform between solutions. It's done in different ways.
Yep.
So what we can do, though, is even though there's paper involved, what we're doing is building relationships with pharmacies. And when those pharmacies do a test, what they can do is load it immediately onto a diagnostics platform. Now, what that does is it makes it possible for the airline and the government of the destination, so the immigration at the destination, to have that information already. So you can work with wallets or you can work without wallets, and you can use the wallets for verification. You can use biometrics for verification. But at the end of the day, if the process that we favor, which is one that connects the lab all the way through to immigration, and of course the passenger is giving opt-in permission, they're giving consent to their information being used for travel, because they would have had to expose it during travel anyway. You have to show your certificate, so it's the information on the certificate that is being transferred. If you work in that way, our Health APIS product actually makes it possible to not need to carry a certificate. More importantly, it removes that vector of the passenger being able to change the result. Because right now, all you need is, I don't know, a scanner, or it could be a phone, a little bit of ingenuity in Photoshop, and you can change your positive to a negative really quite easily. Yep. It's tempting. A lot of people have done it. I've even seen a story of a travel agent even offering it as a bolt-on service.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
you know, it gets a little bit crazy. And if you extrapolate it to a global problem, frauds it could be 1% of fraud, but when you times that by the traveling public, it's a massive problem, because every case is a potential exponential risk in a country when it arrives. So you have to do everything you can to keep your borders safe, and governments are really motivated to do that. So right now, the only way to do it is to close the border. But what we have to do is get to a place where we can structurally open the border and keep processes in place to maintain health security while that border is open. So you've got to open a chink in your border, and you need to look at that, make sure that everyone coming through that gateway in your border is verified, and you can trust that verification. So you even have countries that don't trust the result that's coming out of the lab, because they don't want just any and every lab to be used. So they want to designate which labs, and then they want to know that the result coming from that lab is trustworthy. So we're able to connect all these parties in a trust chain. And actually, touching on a point that you made about putting the airline agents in the firing line of doing the validation and the verification, they may make a mistake. I've even seen a case, read of a case where a positive certificate was let on because the person had a certificate. So they looked at it, looked legit, let the person through, even though it said positive. So you kind of feel for the agent, yes, okay, they would have made a mistake, but the repercussions of that mistake can be huge. So right now, airlines are kind of lumbered with that responsibility. And with our Health APIS solution, that responsibility of checking certificates could, in theory, be moved to immigration. So the airline can check it and say, we think it looks okay, but also immigration can check it and think and say whether they accept it or reject it, or they want it to be manually inspected a bit more, or something like that. So what you do is, as a government looking to reopen its borders, it can actually export its border, its security cordon. It does not have to be in the country itself, because right now somebody else is checking. It could be an agent, it could be an outsourced ground handler is checking a certificate in country X before they come into you. And the first time you get to see that certificate is when the person is actually in your country. So what you're able to do is export that risk and say, well, let's look at your documents. As a government, I want to see that document before you get on the plane and arrive in my country. So it's actually a real paradigm shift. And from a passenger point of view, actually, if the pharmacy or the clinic point of care location is uploading the result, the passenger's not even involved. So all they need to do is give their consent, and the process becomes a lot simpler. Of course, when you have digital passports, it's very similar, but it's just a case of when the airline knows about it, when the government knows about it. So you have a very flexible platform on which to verify results.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, you covered a lot of things there, but I've got to say, I mean, it's such an interesting subject, and something that you said there about the trust chain and about your dealing with the realities, which is that there is going to be paper-based transition periods, so you might as well deal with it rather than try and avoid it. I think that's very, very, very sensible. Now, I'm assuming from a point of ignorance that when somebody gets vaccinated, they get their card, it's linked to a batch, it's linked to where they got it, etc. So that's part of that trust chain, because it's that really is a controlled area. So then you know when your second vaccination is going to be required, if it's one of the vaccinations that requires two. So that information is already stored, and there's lots of information stored about people. So this barrier whereby people feel that, you know, it's not right that there's so much data that people have got access to and they worry about that. But for the good of everybody, some of this step-by-step building blocks of data is so good, because in principle, using your systems, using your ways of thought, if I book a flight in the future, as soon as I've booked it, it should trigger whether or not I'm compatible to fly from the O&D that's linked and any hub point on that particular journey, because of the fact that I've been vaccinated, because whatever the criteria is. Now, that allows then surely countries, and like you said, it's going to take maybe a couple of years for all the vaccines to roll out, and then we're all safe only when everyone is safe. But there will be, hopefully, as scientists will prove, that there'll be a reduction in the transmission from people that have been vaccinated, etc. So if that's the case, then some countries who aren't in the same financial position to have the vaccines, to roll it out, etc., they still need tourism or people visiting to, you know, to boost their economy, to keep them going. That there'll be arrangements, and like you said, red list, maybe there'll be green agreements or something between countries to say, right, look, we've got a problem. If your tourism comes and they're vaccinated, they themselves aren't going to have a major problem, which isn't going to burden our hospitals, etc. And we're not at such a high risk, but we need money. If that sort of thing happens, there's going to be a greater degree of complexity, which is going to need even more of these sort of automated controls. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolute sense. But the solution to that is just dialogue and reaching consensus. Now, that might be technical consensus, it might be process consensus.
Yeah.
But there are different solutions that work in different ways. Some of them centralize data, some of them keep data on a blockchain, some of them use a blockchain to refer to stored data that is on a device. So there's a variety of solutions, and they're going to keep coming out, because there's private industry making solutions. You have some larger organizations that are making it, countries making their own. So it's going to be a proliferation of these. At the end of the day, there are long-standing frameworks for how data is controlled, governed, and kept safe. And that actually has nothing to do with these new solutions that are coming on board. These new solutions have to conform to things like HIPAA, ISO 27001, SOC 1, SOC 2. These kinds of data information security frameworks are there for a reason, and they've predated any of this tech. What we do have to look at, though, is, yes, while we have to go through a separate process to know that the data is kept safe, we have to have, as a society, I think, a broader conversation about the need to verify people's COVID status and their vaccination status. So there's lots of pushback from different parts of society around privacy, around people having vaccine hesitancy, and all this kind of stuff. And some of the misinformation that's been going around has had a big head start. So it means that even though there may be numbers of vaccines that could roll out, there's going to be this kind of natural resistance for it to be introduced. In the meantime, if we take a real situation where we have vaccine shortages and we have vaccine hesitancy, and the vaccine needs to roll out across that landscape. On the other side of it, if we just imagine how things could be when you have a very high level of vaccination within society, you've still got to know who's vaccinated in order to do certain functions. I didn't say every function, just certain ones. When it comes to travel, people haven't got a say in that, because you're going to a country, the destination is going to set the goalposts. They're going to say what needs to be satisfied, and you're going to have to say, right now, have you got a test? Well, it's inevitable that vaccination is going to come into that. So a long time ago, there was a yellow card. There was literally a paper card. When you got a vaccine, they'd stamp that. So a digital wallet is just digitizing that. And digital health stores and processes are just digitizing that. So unfortunately, it's inescapable. But if we bring that back from the extreme where a government says that you've got to prove it and you haven't got any say in the matter, all the way back to one where people are unsure whether to share their status, and we start looking in the middle of that, there is this place where if you go to a bar and you know that people are either vaccinated or have tested negative recently, they have a lower risk. And it means that you can start looking at reopening nightlife, reopening sports venues, maybe not to 100%, because you'd still want some kind of social distancing in there, because the risk is not zero. But it's ascertaining risk without necessarily revealing the underlying test result. Is someone high, medium? Are they vaccinated, not vaccinated, etc.? Right now, we see that as a personal thing to know, but there is this trade-off between keeping that data secret and delaying the resumption of normal life, because this is not just a personal thing. If someone is positive, they have an effect on not just the people they come in contact with, but the people that they potentially infect. So it is a big problem. It needs a big dialogue, and technology has its part to play. I don't think technology can set policy. We just have to provide tools to the policymakers to make things more practical for the people that need to follow them.
Yeah, I think the greenback influences policy an awful lot. And something you just said there made me think. Now, obviously, the way society moves, the way things were in the past has to be remembered and learnt from, so that you can influence tomorrow today. And when you look at the security issues that happened, and then you'd go into big venues, you'd go into concerts, football stadia, everybody would be stopped. You get your bags checked. Everybody gets checked before they go through. Now, that was seen as a huge inconvenience. Now people accept it. Now, and we're talking about the greenback. If I was running a venue and I wanted to prove that my venue had a better opportunity to be used with a certain amount of social distancing, to then bring that little risk factor down to something that people would see as worthwhile, I'd be thinking, well, if it's my venue and I want it to go ahead, I don't care what anybody else says. I only want to let people in who've been vaccinated or who've been tested within 72 hours or whatever it is, and that I can prove it. So it then becomes difficult to prove it if they're all bringing out pieces of paper and stuff like that, because the time for that whole process takes far too long. Now, if there is something digital, then it makes it a lot easier to do that, because it can be scanned with whatever. I mean, do you see that is going to start to happen as people are desperate to get the business back rolling again?
Yeah, well, not only can it happen, I think it should happen. Now, the big question is, should government set the policy? And I think that's what alarms people. So if government says, okay, you got to have a vaccine in order to go to a pub, everyone's going to be up in arms about that. But if a pub owner says, okay, you need to be vaccinated to come into my pub, people are going to push back. It's probably going to turn up on one of the newspapers or something like that. But the pub owner is at liberty to do that. Now, of course, the raging argument right now is no jab, no job, or whatever it's called. A lot of people could see a lot wrong with that. But at the same time, now that higher legal entities are looking at it, they're saying, well, actually, there probably is basis to make that discerning judgment. If you haven't got a jab, you go to work in a meat factory, you go to work in a hospital, the risk of you passing that on is huge. So as a business owner that has been disrupted for the last 18 months, you can see the need, you would know that they have a need to get back to some level of operation. And if the alternative is I can't validate people, or I've got to shut, if I can validate them, then I've got a chance to open. I've got a chance to stay open because I don't get outbreaks in my venue. I don't think you're really going to stop that. This is a global question, and globally, people are going to answer it in different ways. So it's going to happen. In terms of what you're saying about people bringing out pieces of paper, I think that is a problem, because if someone says, well, if you have this special color-coded card or something, you can get into the pub. There'll be someone outside the pub selling those, right?
Yeah.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. And that would be the happiest guy for the night. So I think what we need to do is say, if we're going to make that kind of screening decision in order to get certain things back, in order to get football or rugby or horse racing or what have you back, boxing back, or anything like again, nightlife has really suffered here. What are we going to do? Are we going to say, well, we're going to wait another 2 years for vaccines to roll out? We're going to wait 6 months? Or are we going to say, let's bring some order to this and say, if you have a wallet or a set of wallets that are able to verify my status, they don't need to give your home address and all this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
But somewhere along the line, there needs to be a balance struck. And I think there are going to be venue owners that make a decision. If I have a gym and I validate everyone, people can come and train. It's going to happen. So what we need to do is make sure we don't get trapped into using paperwork to validate that. We have to know that that's going to be an issue. There's going to probably be issues of certain countries not respecting certain viruses, vaccinations, so certain vaccines. So all of this needs to be managed in a way that is structured. And unfortunately, it's taken, I don't know, a good 12 months for us to arrive where we're at now. And lots of things that should be in place aren't, because consensus cannot be reached. So I think the pressure is on. And as a society, as technology providers, we've got to get moving with this. The decision makers have to get moving with this, but we've got to give them the tools. The tools are there. And we are definitely hoping that not only our customers, but customers of competing solutions look and realize that you've got to do something and we've got to work together. So it's not about which technology wins. It's about trying to use technology to get to a better place. Yeah,
and it's that collaboration for success that's important. But also coming back to what you were saying there as well, I always remember I used to travel so much. And anybody that knows me, they knows I always leave it to the last minute. So for me, success at an airport is just as the doors close and it gives you a gentle pat on the backside as you get on the aircraft. That to me is perfect timing. But with that, you'd sometimes have to run to a gate. And I remember when with the boarding pass and the scanning, it was not down to the check-in agent. The check-in agent say, look, sir, you look fit and healthy. You look like you can run as far as it is, faster than most people. And I'd love to let you go through. However, I can't, because as soon as you scan this pass, the gates are not going to let you through. And I think that's where it's going to come to, or that's where it needs to come to, but not with the paperwork, because I know for a fact, if one of the pubs around where I live opened up tomorrow and said only people that were allowed to come in who had their vaccinations both done, blah, 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 that pub would be packed out and people would be happy that they could have, whatever they felt was the need to be in there as safe as possible. And that would be, that would be such a bonus. Now, also, if you look at, and I'm a lot older than you, Shawn, but if you look at, things like, if I was I'd be saying Saga Safe Cruising or Saga Safe Holidays, where people who want to enjoy themselves and get back to some sort of life that they remember and that they want to revisit, if they knew that they were going into a safer environment, then they would readily accept it. And I think it's going to be the businesses and the greenback that's going to drive this. I agree with you. It's not in government's best interest or position to say, if you don't have a jab, you don't have a job, or if you don't if you don't have a jab, you can't get on this train or this bus or whatever. But it's so important to protect society for as long as it's necessary, and then to use this as an opportunity to change the future. And you know, biometrics, everything can be done. You can buy with your eyes. You can, you know, you can do so much. And what's the problem with it? Everything, it would speed up, you know. And I think if we explain more as to why, and being an acronym, what helps you, if people realize that the why, what helps you, is in their interest and benefit, my goodness me, you know. And that's where I think newspapers and the daily news should be focusing on what helps you, rather than what is destroying you mentally, you know, everything. I can't understand all this negative journalism. It drives me crazy. And there's so many positive elements that could be taken that would uplift people and give people the opportunity to see, let's get on with it, let's do it, etc.
Well, first things first, you said that you're the last guy on the plane, but you can't be, because if the door is patting you on the backside, I'm the one sneaking under the door just before it shuts, because I am the last guy on the plane. Now, I mean, I've traveled a fair amount as well. And yeah, I think the efficiency of processing things with your face, the touchless journey, is something that we've done a lot of work on. And yeah, you don't actually need a QR code. You don't need a piece of paper. You don't need a boarding pass. Don't need any of that. I think the key has to be that the person has to be in control of their data. They have to be in control of adding that to the system. They should know when it's removed. They should have trust that it is actually removed. But if they are in control of their data, then this should not be a problem. People and companies should not assume there is so much resistance on the part of the public to do facial biometrics and other type of biometrics driven processes. What they should do is know that they hand over the responsibility of taking part in it to the passenger or the patient, or you know, the club, the person who's going clubbing or whatever it is. They are the person in control of having a profile created. In reality, when you look at something like Facebook, where you may throw your name up there and your pictures up there, that is biometrically identifiable information because it has your face. You can create a new template from that. So there's all kinds of issues that are common even long before you start looking at QR codes or biometrics or anything like that, because a CCTV stream that is capturing your image can work off biometrics right now. So there is a lot of it about. I think it's all about control and how it's used and making sure the person can remove themselves from it. But I do agree with you that there can be a lot of simplification. I think the greenback will drive, the economy will drive a lot of these decisions, because ultimately we've had 1 year of this. We can't have another 2 in this kind of economic malaise. So we've got to be able to restart on some basis. And I think technology does have a massive part to play. I think one of the things that we must be careful of, though, is not to leave people behind, not to leave economies, not to leave countries, not to leave the poor in society behind because they might not have access to this technology. So whatever we do has to be able to work, whether the person's technology savvy or has a mobile phone, or they might have the latest mobile phone, etc. So it's got to be much more inclusive, and it should not be the basis on which discrimination is based, economic discrimination or country-based discrimination, etc. And this is not something that technology can solve. This is policy that must be set at the very highest levels of government and industry to decide how we want to use this. But at the end of the day, we can't just say, oh, there's a problem, we will not make a decision, so we just won't use it. I think it's time to actually start having those uncomfortable conversations and giving people the assurances they need and the control they need over their data in order for these things to happen.
No, 100%. And I also think people have learnt again, as is the case. But when it started off, you know, the vaccine rollout was seen as like a Premier League or a division, and it was competing on numbers, which is crazy. And then that gets animosity, and it gets political parties battling with each other as to why we're not as good as this country or whatever, and why have we been so slow. And that was wrong. Now it's starting to become, I think, a lot more sensible that if someone is ahead, let them learn from it, let them give the benefits to others. And I think it was good to see old Boris, saying that the surplus of vaccines will be distributed to countries that need it. You look at COVAX, the UK is one of the biggest contributors. That's the sort of things that should start happening, so that you share it, because then everybody can share the world. And I think that's so important.
I think it's a very important point. And I think one of the biggest tragedies out of COVID is actually the death. I mean, the sickness and the economic disruption and all of that. Nobody wants any of that. But by making sure that vaccines can get to countries that don't have any, at least they can start penetrating towards the older parts, the more vulnerable parts of society in all countries. And firstly, as humanity, we need to try to bring the death rate down. And then secondly, we have to see how can we restart from this. But things like vaccine hoarding and all of that, that doesn't help anyone. COVAX is great, but I would even personally like to see more being done, because it's about the death rate, and the death rate needs vaccines. And I think it's great to have debate about who should be considered frontline and essential and who should get it first. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that someone dying in a poor country is worth the same as someone dying in a rich country. And when one country has, so far ahead and other ones are so far behind, I think that's something that needs attention at government level, really.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And it's also interesting that you look at, like, now, some of the news is getting, I think, a little bit more sensible, and not playing on emotion and fear and everything else. It's getting a little bit more sensible. And as a result, some of the people are getting more sensible as well, because you look at some of the industries that are really affected, and now they're actually saying, look, we would prefer that this lockdown, that people come out of it in a controlled manner, that we can live with it and not go back into another one, because that will cripple and destroy some of the businesses. So people are wanting to do it now. And that's obviously why lots of governments are now saying it will be data driven, not date driven. And the pressure shouldn't be on a date. The pressure should be, if you reach a certain level of data, you can then make a more calculated decision making outcome.
Yeah, the problem with focusing on a date is it assumes that everything that's going to happen to arrive on that date, and nobody does, because it's fast moving. You got different strains, you got all sorts of stuff going on. So of course, data driven is definitely the way to go. Data driven, process driven, system driven. We've got to think our way out of this. And of course, at the beginning of chaos, of course, people are going to be running around not really knowing what to do. But I think the UK is coming off the back of its third lockdown now. We're based in Spain. We seem to be in a perpetual kind of lockdown / kind of curfew situation. So it's not fun, but the numbers are coming down. And I think everybody recognizes, if you just hold your nerve a little bit more, when the curve is going down, you're actually saving people's lives here. So people will take the pain. What they do want to know is kind of, well, what happens next? And I think the date is less important than the policy, the strategy, and just like you said much earlier in our talk, people can take bad news if they get it in a structured way. They don't want to discover it too late. They want to discover it as they go along. When someone knows that news, pass it on, structure it, pass it on, but don't just like sit on news, sit on information. And the people who are starved of information on the other side have to live their lives. So it's very important for that collaboration to happen, that control to exist. And we are all sharing the problem. Governments and its peoples and its citizens are sharing the problem, not equally, but we're all in it.
100%. Whereabouts in Spain?
Alicante.
Ah, nice. Yeah, nice. Yeah, I lived in Spain for 7 years. Loved it. Best time of my life.
All right.
Great.
Well, it's not too bad. I can't complain. When I look at the weather, I can't complain.
I would imagine. Yeah. Now, just to finish, and obviously we're talking about, dates. Dates can't be the defining factor because you don't have everything. But if you were to give yourself this time next year, what do you think is the biggest benefit that you and your business and your innovations and your solutions could actually bring to the current travel industry, obviously with aviation being the focus?
Yeah, obviously we can only speak for ourselves, but since the question was just directed at us, we would think that if our Health APIS solution was rolled out very widely, we would be able to help tourism get back on its feet safely, travel to get back on its feet safely. And we're not just saying that based on a date in the future when it would start working. It will start working immediately. It's working already. So we work with Caribbean Airlines, helping them validate the status of their crew. We're helping to schedule those tests with their crew. So we're talking with another few airlines as well. It's all small at the moment, but we're proving that the solution works on that scale because it's going to be suitable also, and it's being engineered for much larger airlines. So the logistics of being able to move crew around and validate the safety of passengers is a big problem. This time next year, I would have hoped that we would have helped improve safety. And the biggest goal we would have, with the biggest prize we could have, is to be able to save some lives that we don't actually know about. Because if we are ensuring that fraud is removed from the system, it's not a problem that you see, but it's one that you prevent, and nobody knows about something they don't prevent. So it's kind of hard to quantify it, but that would probably be the biggest impact we would hope to have.
Brilliant, brilliant. Shawn, listen, I've thoroughly enjoyed our session. It's flown by, okay, and I've also learnt a lot, and you delivered a message is very clear, my friend. You know, maybe you should look at getting into politics or into some sort of PR, because that sort of clarity and that sort of focus and fairness is what people need at the moment. So I thank you for your time. I wish you and your team great success, because if you're successful, along with other parties doing the same, then we're all going to be in a much better place. So good luck to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks for the vote. If I ever get into politics, I'll count on it.
Don't worry, you get mine, son. You get mine, 100%, 100%. All right, Shawn, take care.
Thank you. Bye.